Thank you.
That was the most anticlimactic beginning of a podcast episode.
I clicked record and it was just like, nope, denied, not allowed. I was like, come on.
That was really quite funny, actually. Okay, we started. Nope, nope, nope. Oh, there she is, our familiar friend.
Yep. Well, I don't know what it is, but for whatever reason, Zoom keeps playing up. Like the other day, I was on a Zoom call, and you have like the rectangular thing. It had made me like really small with like a massive black outline of my camera. I was like, what in the world is going? So I turned my camera off, yeah, and then turn it back on. Same thing. Turn the Zoom off and on. Same thing. I was like, okay, left Zoom, like just quit Zoom. Came back in, and it was fine. I was like, what in the world is going on? But
Welcome
yeah,
to see.
yeah, exactly.
That's what happens when you got a monopoly.
Yes, yeah, very much so. Right. Discussions today, recap of last week, a chat about academic ADHD. It's a reference to a video that I'm sure we can link somewhere. And we have lots of thoughts. And just so you are privy, we will be recording a second one after this. So the comments of this one won't be in the next one because we won't have seen them. Right.
Yeah.
So we had lots of comments from the last episode.
Yeah,
So
the last one was really good. The stream of consciousness.
yes, you have more to say. So do you want to say your bits and then I'll add in my bits if they sort of cross over? Because you've got like
Yeah,
a paragraph or two.
yeah, I know. I started like just very quickly that, oh yeah, thinking about this, thinking about this. My notes are very much stream of consciousness. That
Reference to the
that
reference
was
to the
not
last
on
video.
purpose either. Cool. So I need to make sure I've got the right one up because I thought I did, and then I realized I don't. Oh, I do. There you go. See? Lovely.
See, this is why you have a dashboard with a data view query that shows you what you need to do.
I know,
And you've
but I
seen mine. You
haven't
you
been.
literally have access to mine, so you can't say I
No,
don't know
I
how.
do. But just because I have access to something doesn't mean I'll do it. I'm doing 8 other things. I do. Oh, yeah. Actually, that's yeah. We'll pin that one. I have thoughts. It's interesting, actually. So, yeah. Well, there was a lot of great comments on the All the Things. I suppose it's the All the Things episode, according to my notes, which I thought it was the stream of consciousness. But okay.
No, well, stream of consciousness was last week,
Oh, is the
but
one that's gone out now?
yeah,
That's right.
it's going out as of 5 minutes ago.
Yeah, about an hour for the podcast episode. So we were talking a lot about AI and all that love. Well, actually, we were talking about a lot of different things in that episode.
That's why I named it all the things. So I was like, I can't pick
Yeah.
a title. There's like 17 different topics in here.
Yeah, I think the podcast says something different just because all the things is not the most interesting thing to be looking at. But I
Yeah, I
remember
mean
what it was.
it's a
I think
podcast episode.
yeah, I mean, I think the main point was we were talking about Tiago Forte's um review way of using Notion AI and it basically replacing progressive summarization. And
Yeah,
our
yeah.
reaction was immediately, yeah, no. And Devas had some really good, fantastic thoughts. I loved them. And he was mentioning like summarizing is the productive step. It's where you actually, when you're trying to summarize something, that's where all the work happens, is what I got from that comment. It's not exactly what they said, but and to me, like the assumptions being made there, which make a lot of sense, is that AI is always the final step. Now, the way that I use AI in my work, and actually on the internet, everyone's like, AI will just do everything for us. And in that context of that video, AI will do the final step. But for me, whenever I use AI, it's summarizing my ideas. Now, I already have my ideas up here in my head and written in varying different forms. So I've already got a lot of the context, which is really important when using AI tools. So, and yet I still put AI summarization in the middle. It's never really the end. It's never really the last thing I do. because often when I see it, and something that I do with my work, whenever it summarizes a piece of content of mine, it's like, oh, that's interesting. I did not see you going there. And it shows almost kind of the possible misconceptions or ideas that I hadn't quite developed. So it gave an alternative view. And I very much view like AI tools as more a brainstorming partner.
So this is something that after that I tried using AI in different like stages, different steps of my writing process, and no matter where I put it, it just annoyed me. No matter where I put it, no matter how detailed I went with the prompts, no matter what I did with it, it just annoyed me. And
Mm.
I think it's because what I have in my head and what I'm writing about, I
Yeah.
have full context. I
Yes.
have full context of my prior knowledge, full context of my understanding and the level of understanding I have. And as soon as I use AI to do anything apart from brainstorm a topic idea, it misses something. And I'm like, you've missed the point. And then I end up spending more time getting AI to get the point than I do actually writing. And I'm like, this is a waste of time.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think whenever I've used AI to write pieces of content for me, it's always been shit.
Yeah.
No matter
Yeah.
how much I prompt it, no matter how much I tweak it, and you can get like,
Especially, I was going to say, especially with topics that it doesn't under. I mean, this relates to something else that Davos mentioned. Is that AI like condenses information? It condenses what you have into something. And I think the example with the textbook example was like, there's a textbook of 1,000 pages, and then you take notes on those 1,000 pages, which makes it 50 pages. But by reducing it, you've obviously reduced the amount of
yeah,
information in there, and eventually it goes all the way to this AI summary. And you're like, well, now you've just got this oversimplified explanation of this 1,000-page textbook. You've lost so much context, so much nuance, and so much information that can educate and justify the decisions that you make. And that's exactly how I feel AI works when it comes to
yes,
writing. And it's just so annoying. I get that we want brief summaries of things, but when they're written out, like the way AI writes them out, it just reads as a blurb. And
yes.
no one goes to a book to read a blurb and says, right, I now understand this thing. No, they go, oh, okay, that's cool. I'll read the book, or I'll listen to a summary of the book, or they'll go elsewhere. They're not going to listen to a blurb and be like, I know this now. No.
No, and I think that is AI is fantastic and it is a
Mm,
brainstorming partner. As I'm using it more, it is a brainstorming partner. It is not a solution. It's not the end step. It's never the end step for me. It is always, okay, here's an idea I have. I want to take you through step by step on what I want to do, how I want to do it, and I want you to play in a very constrained environment. If it is constrained to a huge degree, that is where it is most valuable in my own use case. But it
mm.
has to be incredibly constrained, and one of the big constraints is it has to understand what it's talking about and have some resources on it. But half the time the stuff it has is junk anyway, and then I have to reteach it. But then it helped for me. The way that I use it is like, okay, cool, these are the misconceptions, that because this is built off the internet,
Yeah.
and it reminds me of someone who doesn't think and just follows what everybody says, because that's actually how it's designed, and it's designed to agree with me because it thinks it should, which in a lot of the experiences that I've had with some of my clients, that is exactly what happens. And so I'm like, okay, cool, so you went that way, why? And then my brain starts thinking on how that works, why that works. And it's a predictive text engine. It's not a human, but
Mm.
it gives me more, I suppose, ideas that I can then use to pull it back the other way. And it's very much like a learning tool, I suppose, to
Mm.
me,
I see it
versus
as a soundboard.
yeah, it's basically a soundboard. It is, and I have this a little bit later on. It's literally, I don't trust it on its own. And Doros mentioned about like knowing the subject enough. Do you? Yes. If you do not know the subject at all, do not use ChatGPT, especially not ChatGPT, because it is not connected to the internet at the moment. If you want to start getting a very, 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 very high level, surface level use Bing. Can't believe that comes out my mouth. Use the Bing chat because at least it can search. But
And
then
reference
and
with links.
reference, so you can check your references. That's
And
where I would start. If I
uh,
was to learn a subject from scratch that I didn't know anything about, and I wanted to use, and my focus was to use AI to do that, I'd start with Bing, get to my references, go in there, and then use ChatGPT to summarize stuff I don't understand, or use Bing. It would depend on the context.
I have found Bing chat to be really helpful when it comes to initial search. Like
Mhm.
previously with my initial searches, I'd go to Google Scholar or Elicit or Research Rabbit, and find surface level papers, whether that's meta-analysis, systematic reviews, just general overviews of topics. But when there are topics that are spoken about online, I want to get online perspectives as well to keep myself up to date with what society is like suggesting, because academic papers take like 2 years to get published. So typically they're a little bit behind. And when I'm finding these links, the search results are not always the best results for me because they are either just like bullet points of, hey, this is what this thing is. Right, we'll talk about ADHD later, but if you search for ADHD, most of the first links just explain that ADHD is, this is what ADHD stands for, this is the diagnosis, this is how you get a diagnosis, this is how you can do it. And I'm like, I know this stuff, this is basic, but the first 7 or 8 links, no matter what search engine you use, tell you the same stuff. But with Bing AI, if you ask it a question, it will find a link that answers that question. And
Yeah.
sometimes I will get a link to a forum post on Reddit or a forum post in some obscure website that I've never heard of before that talks about someone's experience of exactly what I've looked for. And I would never find that in the first or second pages of search. Like I even went looking for one of the references that Bing AI gave me, and it was on page 14. It was on page
Mm.
14 of Bing's suggested search. Like the actual search results, I was like, Jesus, like I would never have found this link otherwise. I mean, it wasn't a great link, but it still surfaced that perspective. It was a Reddit post, and I was like, this is useful. This is what I see AI being helpful for. But as soon as I asked it a question about so it was about how, well, it's sort of related to what we're going to talk about in a minute, but it was talking about how ADHD and ADD and all of those sort of like comorbid disorders are linked. And this person was talking about their experience of having one and then going to the next and then being diagnosed with the next, and they ended up having like all these different things. And I was like, oh, okay. But as soon as I asked Bing AI about comorbid disorders, it got confused and started talking about other disorders that wasn't in the same sort of bucket, and then I had to specialize and be more specific. And then yeah, I ended up going in the, I need to teach the AI to tell me what I want it. I might as well just search for it myself.
Yeah,
So I did.
and if you have the ability to search, that's also the thing. If you have the prior knowledge to actually search for it,
Mm.
because that's often what people they don't. So I think that's when it comes in handy. Is that if people don't know what to do, it whenever I'm searching something, for example, that I want to just I use it. It is very much clarifying my thought. It is like I tell it what I want it to think about because it helps me to clarify my thought, not because I want it to give me something really cool. I mean, because I'm in the productivity systems space, I get the same old crap I can find on Twitter. And I'm not. I am instantly like, here we go again. Yeah, yeah, okay. You're now going to talk about, habit formation and atomic habits and
This is I guess of
Eisenhower's matrix.
a little bit sideways, but when it comes to the popular books, I was having a conversation on Discord recently, and they were talking to me about. So someone asked me about Atomic Habits, and I said, "Yeah, it's cool, but there's another book that I've listened to the overview of. I cannot remember the name of the book. I'm scrolling back in Discord at the moment, but
Tiny
essentially,
habits.
it might be, but I don't think it is. I think it's something else. But so oh wow." There's a YouTube channel's name, YouTube guy. He's in behavioral sciences, and he spoke about the book, and the book is more of an academic person with the habits, and it's not drastically different from Atomic Habits, but it's got more nuance and more fundamental science in there that is more accurate to what the science is saying. It's less of a marketable book, but more of a behavioral science backed book, if that makes sense. And I found it interesting looking at the comparison between the two when it comes to like overviews and things, because the overviews of the second book are obviously people inside of behavioral science, because they are the ones that have read the book, and the people that have reviewed Atomic Habits are all the productivity people, productivity gurus, and you're like, interesting. So even the audience of the book is mirroring the simplicity or complexity of the topic. And it does make me think when it comes to the books that are pushed out there. Obviously, readers are attracted to books that they're more likely to read. So if you, and this is going to be a bit of a sweeping statement, but maybe simple books are for simple people. Yeah, I know. And I don't think it's a bad thing, but it does make me question the books that I'm seeing reviewed. Because if a book is being reviewed a lot and it's popular, does that mean it's a simple book? Because when we were looking back at the book episode, when we were talking about books, we were talking about the popular books. And most of those popular books are the ones that have been reviewed by lots and lots of people. And they are the books that frustrate me because they don't go into the nuance and they don't go into complexity. There are some books that are popular that are really good, but I think that's because they are books from like what I would class as industry leading thinkers. They're not, hey, I've done this thing, I'm going to write a book about it. Or, hey, I sort of know this thing, I'm going to write a book about it. It's hey, I've been researching this idea for 6 years, or I've been speaking about this idea for 10 years. I'm going to write a book about it. The book is full of experience. Even though it's not a textbook, it's still full of nuance, context, and there's a deep understanding of what's going on. And my question, I guess, about these books is, how do you figure that out before going to read the book? I don't know if you can. And I think AI is the same. Like, I think an AI response most of the time is, okay, that's cool, but so what? Like, there needs to be another little bit. And like Dovos was saying, with the knowledge, if you don't know what's right and what's wrong, you're putting your faith in that source to be true, whatever true means.
Yeah.
And with the popular books, people just assume they're true. And I think it's the same with all scientists. Scientists have a responsibility. Every scientist that I know online that I would class as a scientist is very aware that people believe what they say because they say science backed. So they are very diligent in their work. But not everyone looks at the diligence unless they're a scientist.
Yeah. Which goes back to quite a lot of our episodes of where we've spoken about that around cite your sources so we know how full of shit you are.
Yes, I think that is it's the simplest solution to like building up an argument. Right? People aren't going to read sources. I understand that. And there's even been arguments between academics, like in the academic world, about whether you should or shouldn't put sources, and some academics don't need sources because they know what they're talking about, etc., etc. Yes, I get that, but if someone wants to build an argument against you, there needs to be sources to explain where it is that you've come from, because not everyone's going to understand your context. Like the Twitter conversation that I showed you, spoke about earlier, that we may talk in the second episode about. But yeah, I think with the AI, the summary removes our ability to have a look into all of those sources.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time it doesn't give us the context and the sources because it doesn't understand what it's talking about. It's just generating text. So you can't really grasp what's going on. If you were to ask it about, I've tried cognitive load theory, it just cites the same typical stuff. Like, okay, well, how do you compare that to ecological dynamics? I don't know what that is. Okay, fine. Right, this is what ecological dynamics is. This is what direct perception is. This is what prospective control is. Right, how does this compete with this? Oh, it doesn't. Right, okay, great, thanks. Yes, it does. You just don't understand what we're talking about. And I think it removes elements of like complex learning, which is where most humans are. Well, I say most humans. I think most humans are when they have expertise in the field. When they don't have expertise in the field, AI is amazing. AI is great at doing simple tasks.
Yeah.
It's just really good at it.
And that's exactly how I personally use it. When I have an idea and I want to just get really common suggestions, I will go straight to it. But when I want to learn something, I won't.
I tend to go to Twitter to get a
Yeah.
general like gist of where the social like button is, like where the social thread is going at the moment, like where they're pushing. But AI is another backup to see sort of what are the general opinions to challenge misconceptions, and learning styles is still a thing apparently. Yeah. Right. I've been ticking off my stuff as I go. I don't know about you.
Cool. Oh yeah, totally. No.
Can you see my ticks?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I've pretty much said anything,
Okay.
everything.
Right. Well,
One thing that that Devos was talking about was as the last thing
linear
was
author
around,
story.
yeah, it was around this. It's great note, that one. He was talking about how he keeps track of stories. He's writing a story, writing a fantasy story, I think it was. And how does he track everything and how he's trying to figure out how to do it. I mean, and the best thing to do was to discuss what I do as a DM, because it's not the same and it's non-linear, so it's kind of it linked quite nicely. And I mean, I have a note. It's very much what I do for note taking, where I have one kind of main note which has everything in it, and then I link out to like the locations that I'm going to, or monsters that they're fighting, or NPCs or PCs, so non-playable characters and playable characters. And I kind of sprawl from this central line. And then in terms of connecting them together to create a cohesive story, one, I let that emerge naturally, which is probably going to be a little bit different to an actual linear book because it is a linear book. But I let it emerge naturally. But as things emerge, I have a canvas where I just like, oh, this is a thing that I can use. This is oh, yum, give me that. I'll put that there. That's a possible plot line for later on. Oh, that's a thing that they said. Let's use that. So that's kind of how I use it inside of my Obsidian.
Yeah, I think that's exactly how I write. Is I have my research project file and then I have my sources. And I think that is it's the most logical way in my mind to write something with various sources and various arguments, because you can go into whatever section you want, you go in and out. I don't know whether you've seen the video in the course, the Obsidian onboarding course, of my writing canvas. I know I've showed it to you briefly before.
You show me the canvas, but I haven't watched the video.
Yeah, the video explains like more in depth about how I actually use it and go through it, etc. But yeah, it's so helpful being able to take those sections of that big file and see them in a canvas, because it's a drastically different visual, and you can also add, because obviously it's in a card, colors to it. So I essentially have like categories and like priorities and statuses on sections of an article that I'm reading, and it can be separated or all together. And I think that is one of the things inside of Obsidian and Scrivener to an extent that you can do that just makes writing fun. Like, it's fun to write. And I want to sort of combine this with one of my other comments from Davos's comment, which was about science channels being oversimplified using non-proven facts. And I think this is because when YouTubers sometimes script their videos, they either script them to tell a story, or they script them using an outline of something they currently understand, but they don't always do the research for the story. Like they have an idea in their head, I want to do something about this. And then they go and tell that story. But telling a story through science or with evidence, they're different things. And I think I don't know their processes, but I would imagine in their processes, they don't have a right, I'm now going to research this thing. They have a I'd done the research, sort of. In other words, they had experience of this topic of conversation. They've had a look around some things. Maybe they've spoken to some experts, and then they've shared their personal opinions on it and their stories about it, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But it is a little bit frustrating when you see them make claims and arguments and they don't do anything about it. It's like, I'm like, just add a source. Explain how you got to that point, rather than making a claim, a sweeping statement, and then moving on. It's very irritating. I know as someone that creates content as well, I do that because I'm not aware of the things that are sweeping statements to me because it's hard to identify them. But then in the comment section, if people do have a question, I respond to them. Most of the bigger channels don't.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, where the difference between a piece of content and a piece of community content gets involved. I know some of the bigger channels are trying to build communities of whether that's on Discord or Circle or Slack. Like they're trying to build communities to help answer those questions. And this is where I think the education system comes into YouTube. And this is where I'm really excited to explore education, because basically my whole left side of my nine box square is all about ecological dynamics, and applying it to education. So it's my main focus. But it is where a lot of my time in research is going now, rather than being a little bit sporadic and trying to understand like everything. I'm narrowing in. And it's interesting to see how many videos are done on the education system that say, this sucks, this is bad, this is wrong, we shouldn't be doing this. And literally none of them give a solution. And none of them explain why they're bad, apart from testing is bad. And the Prince EA video, what is school for? Well, all you need to do is look at why schools were built, and you can answer that question. So it's a really bad question, but it's a marketable one.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, where's your sources? Where's your facts? Where's your argument? What points can you make? And instead of saying, ha, you're wrong, or this is useless, or finding out mitochondria is bad, like, I'll rephrase that. Finding out mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell isn't useful in everyday life. Yeah, true. But what are you going to teach instead? Taxes? How many 13-year-old kids do you know that are going to go, oh, we've got a lesson about taxes today, I can't wait? And yet in the video he says, oh, I didn't know taxes when I left school. Yeah, because most kids don't care about taxes when they're in school. And not being funny, adults still hate taxes even when they're out of school. So you teach them about taxes isn't going to help. So you'd need to teach them a skill that could be transferred into, which is math. And how do you teach math without a thing to do? Well, you then start teaching stuff that isn't necessarily applicable outside of school, i.e. trigonometry and circle theorem, but it's teaching them skills that are somewhat related. Am I justifying the system of them teaching that sort of math? No, I'm just saying that's why they're doing it. There is a reason behind it.
Yeah.
Is it the best solution? Probably not, but you don't give a solution either. So you have no argument. All you're doing is bitching about a system that everyone knows is bad. Okay, do something about it then. Okay, I've done a video. I've shown the world that it's bad. Yeah, but the world already knew it was bad. Everyone inside the education system already knew it sucked. That's why they've been trying to petition and change the systems. But policies take ages. Government, frustrating, like every government, is frustrating when it comes to education because they all have their own views. Yes, they want to be a little bit biased as well. But I know this is a little bit side tangenty. But the science channels on YouTube are exactly the same as all of the people inside of education trying to teach their subject. They teach their subject, but sometimes they leave out the reason, the point, the argument. And that's like in school, it's a different conversation. But on science communication, if you're trying to be the next gen teachers, you've got to be good at what you do, not just good at telling stories.
Yeah.
A little bit of a rant there, but
yeah, I loved it. I don't disagree. It's very boring, I know, but yeah, I agree.
Okay, right. And then the last comment I have, which, I mean, you can see me ticking the boxes off. It would have been really nice if I could see you ticking boxes off. You know what? I'm going to turn all of yours into tasks. Just so I know that the tasks will be like, yeah, John hasn't done anything. And then you're going to sit there and just tick them all off. Yeah, my last point is from Robert. Robert is saying about Google Docs and working with a team. and it's really useful. Oh, you have the task plugin. Do you have the task plugin enabled? Because I now see all the dates.
I didn't have it as tasks.
Sorry?
That's why I didn't have it as tasks.
Oh, because they took off as dates.
I know I could turn it off.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not that. Yeah, well, whatever. So editing in Google Docs. What I actually I didn't even think about this, but we are using the same file at the same time.
We are.
I didn't even acknowledge that until I started talking about this point, but we're using the same file at the same time inside of Obsidian, and there's been no conflict issues. And I think it's because Obsidian merges so quickly.
Yes.
I think because it merges so quickly, and there is almost no chance for there to be a conflict issue. It's fine. I think if we were typing at the exact same time,
Yeah, and I think at the moment all we're doing is we're reviewing the document and doing one very small task, which is ticking something.
but I did type a note.
Hmm?
I typed a note down the bottom of mine during this.
AI's in a row. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but it's still one line, isn't it? When you start, I
Yeah.
remember when we've done it with longer sentences or paragraphs, it has.
Well, as soon as there's like something that you've typed at the same time. So I think if we were working in the document at the same time going through, then yeah, it makes sense. Robert's example was about editing with a team. And I completely agree. Google Docs is best
Yeah.
for that. Like, I'm not going to say Obsidian is better for that.
No,
My
it's not.
question though, is why everyone is working in the same document. Because from my experience working in small teams, if you have multiple people working in the same document, most of the time the conversation kind of disappears. Like, because everyone's like, if you've got like most people I've had on a call at the same time working in the same document, it's three working in the same document. There were other people on the call, but they weren't like doing anything in the doc. They were just viewing it. And whenever you're typing, you're not talking. And if you've got three people typing at the same time, no one's talking. So from my experience, it's normally one person does the writing, and then maybe someone else adds a note in here or there, but they then go and add the note. Very, very similar to what we're doing. Like, I'm adding a note when you're talking. You're adding a note or ticking stuff off when I'm talking. So we're not working at the same time because we're in a call. I think
Yeah.
where Google Docs has its power is when you're not in a call, you're not talking, you're not having a conversation, but you're working on the same file at the same time. And I think, to me, in my head, the only reason you do that is when you're taking notes, whether that's writing or whether you're taking notes on something. And yeah, it's just interesting to see. It would be interesting to see how Obsidian can move forwards with that, because there was a comment recently on my sync video about they basically said that they didn't understand the point that I was making about sync being expensive, etc. And I said, and I don't think they fully grasped what I was saying when it comes to sync and not having good sync features. When it comes to, so what Capano was talking about in the live stream, when it comes to having two people working on the same doc at the same time, and sharing information with people that don't have an Obsidian sync, and giving them editor like options, and the suggestion type editing thing, which a plugin is being developed for at the moment in Obsidian, but it's not at the moment in Word. Like, those sorts of editing things, sync should help with. But have I still got? No, I don't. Okay, I thought I still had Outliner enabled. But I don't. I looked at your bullet point. I was like, that looks bigger than normal. But yeah, so I think Google Docs is the best solution for collaborative writing at the same time.
Yeah.
But if you don't need to write at the same time, I feel Obsidian is the better writing tool for me.
Yeah.
For formatting, Microsoft Word. Yeah, I know. Like, even Google Docs sucks at formatting, but for formatting Word information, like getting indents in and all the like book stuff that you got to do, Word is just better for that. But actually writing, It's easier in Obsidian. I think if there was a cleaner way of organizing Obsidian, i.e., align text to center, that sort of thing inside of Obsidian, if that existed and it didn't have all of the codey stuff associated with it, because you can't do it, you just need to add a CSS class to the line, which you'd have to do on every single line, which is just a no-no. Like
Effort.
when you're right, I mean, it's not effort because hotkeys, which is the same as Word. It's just when you type, because live preview, you then see all of the CSS whilst you're typing, which is not what you want to see. And it's the same with highlighter, like the community plugin highlighter. It's great for adding like more custom highlights to the file, but because it's CSS, you have to see the class, whatever, blah, 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 and then find the word you're writing. And it's just not a pleasant writing experience. It needs to be a true what you see, what you get editor, not a halfway. But the halfway is good enough for simple text writing, which is what I think most people need. I rarely use highlights, and I rarely format text. I don't like formatting text when I'm writing, because it just adds another frustration point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I always find formatting text as a distraction. It always distracts me from the work that I'm actually trying to do. That's the reason why I went to Notion in the first place, because there was less formatting.
I think that's part of Notion's marketing, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, must have been.
Like simplified writing.
Yeah, it is very simple. But then, oh gosh, I'm currently doing some work for someone. I'm building a Notion thing with some documentation. I'm like, I want to be an Obsidian now. I just want to be an Obsidian. Just let me back. It's like I could link this thing to this thing really easily, but no, I have to do it a really slow and long way, and it's not quite the way I want it. And I'm like, I miss Obsidian. Let me back it there.
Yeah, but you can do backlinks in Notion.
I know.
Yeah, but you can mention, you can use brackets and link inside of a Notion page. Or you could do a synced block.
Nowhere near. It's so clunky.
Yeah, but
and I think that's where Obsidian. Whenever I come back in, I know what I'm doing immediately. Even when I first started, I knew.
I was going to say, I'm curious. Like when it comes to how many plugins are you using? Community plugins. The reason I ask while you're finding that out is a lot of people think they need to use community plugins to really use Obsidian. And I've had questions recently on the channel about replicating August Bradley's PPV system inside of Obsidian, like all of it, the tasks, the projects, the vaults, all of them. And I've had lots of questions about how to get started with Obsidian, and Obsidian's too complicated, and you have to understand Markdown and all these other things. Sorry?
17, and half of them I don't use.
Okay. And I feel like, again, it's one of those things where people see all of this stuff on YouTube and they don't need to use any of it at all. But I feel like Obsidian is simpler than Notion.
Yep.
Like if I was to break my vault down into like minimal vault-esque, I could do everything that I currently do minus. So I would only need the Zotero integration plugin for obviously bringing things into Zotero, and I think data view and metadata menu would be the only other ones that I'm like, yeah, I'll use those. I don't need them, but I'll use those.
Yeah, I mean, I have like 17, but most of them I don't really use. I'm just looking through them. I could get rid of most of them. The only ones I would probably use, once again, Zotero, metadata edit, because I just love metadata menu. It's just so quick.
Yep. I think
and data view, and then Commander. I think I would have Commander on there as my kind of like, I like pressing buttons.
I think Commander and Quick Add would be like the next ones. I did my obviously the top 10 community plugins. Even though there's 10 in there, I think it's really only 4 or 5. But even the Commander and the Quick Add, I don't need them. They're just convenience. Like I push the plus and then I push easy, essay or blog or whatever. But I could easily go into
simple,
a file.
Isn't it? Yeah, it is ease of use versus actually a necessity.
Yeah, like
But I
I could
suppose,
easily go into a file, like creating a file through the quick switcher, which is core, and then going into the core templates and then activating the template, which is all I'm doing with the commander and quick add. It's just I'm pushing buttons instead of going through and doing a little bit of mental work. And those that's why I get frustrated when people say Obsidian's complex. Like, I'm going to call out Dimitri a little bit here because Dimitri, I'm friends with Dimitri anyway. But he reviews tools and stuff, and he said 3 reasons not to use Obsidian. One of the reasons was Markdown, and Notion has Markdown, so I was like, okay, that's kind of redundant. The other one was syncing, and he said syncing is expensive, and I said no, it's not because you can use any cloud service, and most people only have 1 or 2 devices anyway. And to be fair, like using a memory stick or storing it on an external hard drive, if you've got loads of stuff, you could do that as well. And the other one was it's too complex. So you need to know loads of codey stuff to get started. And I was like, I don't know about that. I really don't know about that. I think Markdown is the only thing that when you initially see Obsidian, like, oh my God, this is so weird. Because like you actually see the Markdown,
yeah,
whereas
whereas
others you
Notion,
don't.
yeah,
But
hindsight.
once you're over the Markdown thing, I think everyone goes like dives like head first and is like, yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was a very long comments.
They were
uh,
good comments though. Keep them
yeah,
coming.
yeah, keep them coming. So, we're going to talk about ADHD in academia.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'm so intrigued.
So, do you want to? Oops, I clicked on the link. My bad. Have you seen my notes page actually? Oh, be
I
quiet.
haven't actually, no. I should have done that.
I was going to say, yeah, it's how to ADHD. Why was 2023? I'm going to guess it's close to the top of
Yeah.
my sources. Yeah, because you can see how I take notes. For those that are listening, basically, I take the note, I write the note out of what I have in my head, maybe something that was said, and then I use actually a community plugin called Paste URL into Selection. So I just highlight the words and then paste the timestamp from the YouTube video. So I have the timestamp on it.
Nice.
But yeah, so it just makes it look a little bit cleaner with the links and stuff. I don't actually put the timestamp link inside of the research file, but they're the notes that I took. I don't know what notes you've taken.
I've taken a great deal of them.
You
Nowhere.
okay. I was going to say it's
Yeah,
one of those.
my brain was like doing multiple tasks at once this morning. So
Yeah, I can also see your brain doing like 100 flips in a row, like listening to this. You're like, oh, I'm gonna go all the way over there, and I'm gonna go all the way over here now.
yes,
Now
he
I'm gonna go
did.
all the way up there. You're like, yeah. I've listened to it twice. So I listen. So this is how I listen to YouTube videos and decide whether I'm going to take notes on it. I listen to the video. Then if I get to a certain point to the video, there's no actual number of this. Obviously, every video is different. I'm like, you know what? I'm taking notes on this, and then I listen to it again. For
Mm.
this video, I think I got about 9-10 minutes into it, and I was like, I just need to take some notes on this. And it's like a 20-minute video. And essentially, it's an interview between the woman from ADHD, How to ADHD, I don't remember her name, uh, that talks with her researcher, Patrick LeCount.
Yeah.
Something like that. And he is ADHD, but didn't want to share that he was ADHD, and he researches ADHD for a channel all about ADHD.
And sharing their experience of ADHD.
Yes. Now, what got me intrigued was a lot of the perspectives that he was sharing about his relation between ADHD and academia. Where did your mind go?
My mind very much a little bit of the academia, but it mirrored a lot of my experience with my own identity conditions that I have, and not just the whatever ADHD and autism is neurological. Yeah, that's a whole nother thing. But like, but just also because I'm blind in one eye. So that's also part of it too. And so some of that came in for me as well, of like just hearing his experience and like, yeah, that sort of makes sense. And yeah, I understand. And also, huh. And it was very much like, and also, huh.
Yeah, so some of the points that I've taken here, he doubted the diagnosis, and this is
Yeah.
something to this day I still struggle with when it comes to a lot of the neurodiverse disorders, is the diagnosis to me, having not gone through them, I'll make that disclaimer, seem very subjective and very shallow. Like it's very hard for me to say yes, no to any of the questions that they ask. And I feel like if I was to go in on a different day, I could come out with a different result. And that to me just rings alarm bells. Like it's a red flag for a diagnosis if I can go in on a different day and get a null diagnosis. And it makes it
No, not quite. From my understanding
Mhm.
and my experience, obviously I've had my diagnosis when I don't remember when. I think it was college. I got my diagnosis, so it very much mirrors his experience of like I had it in college. I got the diagnosis in college. Also diving into academia to try and understand how you work. I'm like, shut up, calling me out, which made me giggle a little bit. But with them as well, with my two little ones who are diagnosed, um, it's not just about how they act in the session.
Mm.
It's also their history as well, which also the assumption there is that the parents can see it, which is the problem. And I had this discussion. We were talking and chatting to one of the teachers from the new school that my daughter's going to, and it was like, was there anything else you had that you thought about? And I'm like, we were just sat there going, no, no, not really. And then as she was discussing something, we went, oh yeah, no, that's something that she does. That's actually quite important. It's just something that we experience. It's our normal life. So it's not odd, odd, when
Mhm.
really it is not
Exactly.
and that's the thing.
It's not normal, typical, but you don't know what normal or typical is because for
Yeah,
you
I
it
hate
is.
I struggle with that phrase. When I'm marketing, it's easy because I know it's marketing and it grabs people's attention. But when I'm actually I have a real
Disdain.
difficulty with neurotypical,
Mm.
non-neurotypical, what's neurotypical, what's not neurotypical, because in this house, autism, ADHD, all of those things are neurologically typical for us
Yeah,
because we're used to it. It's only when we go out into the world where there are way more different experiences that it becomes non-neurotypical. But even then, depends on who I'm talking to and being with.
exactly.
And yeah, this is the complexity of, and I think this is something that I grabbed from this whole entire thing was around that whole, it's so personal. Like everything that Patrick was talking about was very much his own, well, the best way I can put it is his own shit. It's
Yeah.
it's his own brain shit.
And that's what I was going to go towards because so I'm just going to read off a couple of notes here. So the doubt he doubted the diagnosis to start with, and he's in academics, so he's got like questions backwards and forwards about whether it's true, whether it's not. And then he was wondering, okay, is he being successful because of the meds that
Meds,
he's
yeah.
on, because of, or is it like not because of the meds? Like, what were the meds actually doing? He hadn't done like actual academic tests, so he didn't know whether it like was it him getting the success before the meds or after the meds, and it just added more questions to him. Then we've got like he worked a lot to stay up with others, and is that because of ADHD he worked a lot, or is it because of other things? Because when you look at ADHD and other neurodevelopmental disorders and things like anxiety and depression, it's comorbid. And there are lots of examples of people before COVID that were anxious, and the anxiety disguised, covered, hid ADHD traits. And then COVID hit, and then they're in their own environment, and now suddenly, oh no, I am actually ADHD. The anxiety was hiding it, which makes me think, okay, you worked a lot. Did you work a lot because you were worried about being judged? In which case, I wouldn't say that's your ADHD putting you behind. I would say that's your anxiety pushing you to work. And that's where, like, the reason why you're doing something changes, I think. You were going to say something?
Yeah, oh, this is interesting because we were having a discussion last night with my kids. We were on our way home, and we OCD was mentioned, so obsessive compulsive disorder. And my little boy, who is curious about absolutely everything, went, "What's OCD?" And so we described it as best as we possibly could. And my partner went, "Yeah, so here's an example," and I went, and he was, "Okay, I know what it means, but I don't get it. Like, it's called obsessive compulsive disorder," and I could just see his face going, "Huh." I'm like, "Do you regret me asking that question?" He goes, "No, but what does it actually mean?" And then when you sit with that, and it's like, how do you explain something like OCD? Because it's not just cleanliness; it's multiple things. And something that we spoke about was that, like, my partner has OCD traits,
Mm-hmm.
but does she have OCD? And that's the problem.
Yeah. And
Because
that relates to the next point. Not ADHD enough.
I have so many things to say about that.
Like
That
what is enough?
that there was the one that made me go, "Oh, I know what Danny's talking about as well." That was the first thing where I just heard you. And that I think is that's the hard part about social media and ADHD, autism, all of the conditions, is that, are you this enough? Like, identity driven conditions. I think that's the best way I would
Mm,
describe it, as an identity driven condition. Is And there's gatekeeping in that as
yeah.
well. People,
Good
you're
and
not
bad.
enough. Well, you're not this. You haven't done this enough. You're not you don't struggle with this. You don't have it. And it's interesting because the lines, going back to the diagnosis, are so stupidly fine and so rubbish.
I wouldn't even say there are lines. Like, people say, "Oh, draw the line in the sand." Well, people are treading all over it. The line goes literally everywhere. You can't see a line. Every time someone talks about it's kind of like the Schrodinger's cat. Like, as soon as you acknowledge the line is there, it's no longer there. It's a paradox. You can't have a line for ADHD. You have enough of these traits, or you don't have enough of these traits. And that is my biggest issue with so many of these diagnoses, disorders. Like, I don't see them as a disorder. I see them as something that makes you different from other people. And yes, it can make it harder to do something when compared to someone else in a specific context, but in the same way, you're going to have an advantage in another context. So what are you trying to do, really? Are you just measuring the amount of context you have advantages in? Well, doesn't that depend on what environments you put yourself in? If you're put in the same environment as someone else, then someone is going to have more advantages than another person. That's just how comparison works.
Mm.
But you put them all in a different environment. You put to conform to some of these views, if you put neurotypicals in a neurodivergent environment, the neurotypicals will struggle if everything is modular and the way people assume. And the neurodivergents would thrive because they're in an environment that suits them. And at the moment, the education system is the other way around, sort of. I don't want to get like intermingled there, but it's the line, and there isn't a line, but there needs to be a line for a diagnosis. So who comes up with the line? And how does the line change? And that reverts back to my previous point about the diagnosis, doubts about the diagnosis. It's like me. Obviously, ADHD as a personal quest, I guess you could call it. Do I have it? I had never even thought about ADHD until Brian Jenks mentioned it. Like, I spoke to Brian Jenks 3 years ago now, I think, because he had ADHD, but he was using Obsidian. So I was speaking to him about Obsidian. And every time I mentioned a story or something that I do or a behavior, he was like, "Do you have ADHD?" "No." "Are you sure?" "No, but I don't care." And when I spoke to you, you're like, "You're probably neurodivergent." And the more I look and speak in the neurodivergent community, they're like, you probably are. You probably are. And I'm like, "You should get tested." I don't give a shit. Like, I
That
really
yeah,
don't
that
care.
that is the thing of, like, if I think, would I get tested now? If I wasn't already diagnosed, would I get tested? And I'm not sure I would, because it's almost the case of, like, and I think my attitude of your neurodiversity, whatever it's just you.
Exactly. Like that's
Like,
how I see
and
it.
I think because you appear solid in your own identity, you don't need a label to match that identity. The reason why, like for me, my use of autism is to translate to other people why I interrupt all the time.
Mhm.
It's not for me, it's for them, because it's like, and maybe there is a little bit of me in there just to ensure people realize I'm not actually rude.
That right there is why I personally get irritated with the labels,
Yeah,
because I mean, school is one example where people get a diagnosis, they're dyslexic, they're dyspraxic, they have ADHD, they whatever, and they get advantages that others don't get. Um, and what I think that does is it gamifies the diagnosis. I know students deliberately did bad on dyslexic tests to get a diagnosis to be dyslexic to get a free laptop. I know students that did that. And I know other students are struggling with student finance that are going, well, if I do this test and if I come out as ADHD enough, I get support, I get longer time on my assessments. Now, they're gamifying the diagnosis of
yeah,
something that is a disorder. And I think that's really bad, really wrong. But
yeah,
it's what the environment, i.e., the system, has built with it. And when it comes to finding that, like, what's the label good for? At the
yeah,
moment, I personally don't see what the label is helpful for unless you are to a point that medication is helpful.
yes.
Where do you find that line?
That's the problem. There isn't a line.
Exactly. And when you like, no matter how many times I look into the ADHD research about genetics, about medication, the medication has nothing to do with ADHD. Nothing to do with it at all. The medication is to do with the way the brain functions. And the way the brain functions is almost nothing to do with ADHD, because ADHD is a social. It's to do with social interactions with the environments
Yeah,
that you're in. So you can not have ADHD, take the medication, and still be better at the thing. And have ADHD, take medication, and be better at the thing, i.e., focus, or whatever you want to do. So it's not ADHD medication, it's focus medication that can help people with ADHD.
yeah,
So it's kind of like a, to me, the label doesn't mean that the meds now suddenly work. It's not like I can take cancer medication and then not get cancer in the future. It doesn't work like that. And that's why I'm like, okay, what's the label for? And I think the label is, like, personally, in my head, I think it's for the people that struggle with understanding what's going on. And I don't think the label helps them with that as much as they think it does, because it brings up more questions, more comparisons, and can lead to other issues. And it also helps other people, helps communicate to other people why they're struggling with something. But then my question in my head is like, well, why do other people need to know this? Why do other people need to know that I interrupt because I have this thing? Does it matter? Other people interrupt and don't have this thing. I'm saying this thing because it could be a
yeah,
variety of different disorders. I know I disrupt. Everyone in my household disrupts each other when we're talking. None of us are diagnosed with anything. Well, yeah, anything in this sort of area. Like, obviously, I'm half blind, half deaf. My dad's got medication for different things. Mum's got medication for different things. But like, they're biological things, not what I would class as like social neurodivergent. I need to come up with an actual word for this stuff because I don't like the words that are used. But none of us are diagnosed with these things. But if you were to look at the assessments, all of us have traits.
mm,
All of us
yeah,
interrupt. And interrupting to me is just normal. But it's not normal. But when I was in school, everyone interrupted everyone else. You look at kids, everyone interrupts each other all the time. Does that mean every kid is ADHD because they interrupt? No. There needs to be other things as well. But what other things are they? And it just creates this massive blurry line. And I keep coming back to this point, which another point from this conversation. He said statistics are not great for those with ADHD. Now, someone in academia, for someone with academia, that statement, I'm just going to say it, that pissed me off. That really pissed me off. Because how do academics test for people with a disorder? They take the most severe cases and see if there's a significant difference. Why would they do that? Because they need to find a significant difference for publication. So he's using statistics that are going to be biased towards those with severe ADHD and saying they don't find great success. Well, that immediately gives a bias, 1 with the statistics, 2 with the outcome, 3 with the interpretation, and 4 with the intervention that you would do then moving forwards. So I'm like, that is the worst type of simplification you can do when it comes to academia. And it's being done by someone in academia with the disorder. And I'm like, if anything, you'd be fighting against it. And you'd be saying you were successful, you had ADHD, you buck the trend. And loads of people do buck the trend because the stats are biased. And they even talk about stats being biased in other videos. I'm like, there is no behavioral integrity here. I don't understand what's going on. Why are you being this stringent with some research and not others?
So the way that I took that is like that's the common, like, if you just follow the science that's just been posted and you don't take the context of anything else or any of the nuance, that is the result. Like it is, hey, this isn't good. Look at these statistics. Most people with ADHD don't do well. They don't have high productivity. I mean, I have problem with the word productivity anyway. Just won't touch that one because I can go on a big, massive rant about that anyway. Every time he said, "Oh well, my productivity," I'm like, that's why I don't go to academia. Well, scholastic academia.
Yeah, formal.
Formal, that's the one. Yeah, and it's just like that was my interpretation of what he said. It was very much like, this is the opinion of people in academia, which goes back to the us and them mentality thing, which is also
That's interesting because he used that point as one of the reasons as to why he didn't want to say that he had it.
Yeah.
So he was using the science to back up his reasoning. So he was using the science as a part of his philosophy to justify his behaviors. But he knows that the research is biased. So he knows, in theory, his philosophy is biased. So he should be aware that his behaviors shouldn't match that statistic. But it went the other way. And that's where I find frustrating. It's like you've used stats from research that you know are going to be biased, that you've said are biased, but you're using that to justify the decision that you're making to not say something. If anything, it should be the other way around. You see the stats and you go, well, no, I'm the difference here.
But that is the thing. You've got to, this is the mental gymnastics, which is why what I was saying before of like, this actually doesn't, hot take, this has nothing to do with ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
It's to do with his mental health.
Yeah.
Not his ADHD.
I agree.
And I think that was what I got out of this. Like a lot of like, yeah, no, this is because when I am mentally healthy and I feel good and I'm content and I'm in that position, like I just don't care. Like I'm just getting on with it.
Two of the last notes. He can't work harder than this anymore, so something has to change. And do it at all costs. Don't forget your mental health. Right? They were the sort of last-ish 2 points that he refers to. And this is why the label of ADHD to me means nothing. It's about the practice. What are you doing in practice? Not the label that you have, not the behaviors or traits or tendencies. It's about what you're actually doing and how you go about doing it.
Yeah.
Do you have a philosophy of practice? Yes or no? Everyone does. It's whether they're aware of it or not. When you practice, do you have behavioral integrity? Do you do things that match what you want to be doing? Do your behaviors match your morals and values? If they do, great. If they don't, why? Reflect on that. Reflect on it, reflect in it, reflect after it. Be a reflective practitioner. Chapter 1 of how to become a sports coach. And when you're doing that, it doesn't matter what label, what diagnosis, what disability, whatever you have like on top of you or in your mind, because it's the practice, it's doing the thing, finding an environment that you can work in. And Casey Neistat did a video, released a video yesterday about creative poison and him talking about his ADD association. It's funny. He said, it's great and it's bad, but I'm roughly quoting, I find an environment that I work best in, and I use that. And that's what he did. That's how he found success. That's how he works. That's how he practices. He finds an environment that he works best in, and he does it over and over again. And that's what he did with his daily vlog for 800 plus days. That's what you got to do. Find a way to practice and practice. I don't see why it needs to be that more complicated than that. You're just sitting there nodding.
Yeah, I'm just, yes, that's been my experience. It's the awareness. It's the awareness of, on, and in.
Yeah.
Of what you're doing, on what you're doing, and in what you're doing. Like, it is literally, do you follow what you believe? Do you create a scenario or an environment, that's better. Do you create an environment that you can work within? And when you don't, do you know how to adapt the environment? Because obviously you can't always be in an environment that works.
Mm-hmm.
But you can adapt the environment
By adding constraints,
by adding the constraints, by doing all the lovely stuff, you know. And I think that's why, that is my obsession, like with my autistic obsession, my hyper focus is and the reason why I love like the whole ecological dynamics, complexity theory, dynamical systems. I can never say dynamical systems theory.
You've read it enough.
That's why I love it so much, because it almost, it removes all of the stuff that's attached to the identity of autism, ADHD, like all of these things that are attached, that we become attached to. It almost just goes, yeah, okay, but guess what? It almost doesn't matter. Now, it still is hard sometimes.
That would not have come out your mouth a few months ago.
No, it wouldn't have. No, and there's been a lot of reflective practicing from me of like, because and I think deep down I did it, that opinion, that view was there. I just couldn't articulate it in a way that made sense, because I don't think I ever did every day. And obviously I'm speaking from the future now, so I obviously have recency bias and all that lovely stuff that's there.
After actual reflection.
Yeah, like I do think that somewhere deep down there was that, like, well, it just doesn't really matter, because I didn't go around thinking that I was autistic all the time, so I had to fix everything. Like, I was broken and I needed fixing. I don't think that was, it wasn't always in the conscious forefront and being acted from that place, but it was always somewhere there. And I think that is the case for people who identify with like neurodivergence, all that lovely language. And that for me is my kind of passion of like, okay, cool. This is really interesting because it sets you free from your own constraints and also gives you capacity to add constraints. And it puts the onus almost on you and gives you back that freedom to choose, because you feel that you can't because of the identity that you have associated with and the assumptions that you have made.
I agree. Yeah. I think the constraints-led approach to me makes more sense. Obviously, I'm biased because that's what I've been taught for like 6 years in higher education. But like looking at the high performance people in the world, most of them are in sport, like high performance sport, or they're in high performance activities that use the high performance sports literature. So it just makes sense to me to map how it works, all their research, into my own personal performance. And when I did that, I got through all of the struggles that I had. On the second channel that I keep mentioning, that animation is, I've made so much progress and so little progress at the same time on it. Like I have learned loads, but the actual video is still only like a minute done. But that's where I want to talk about my stories. And I think looking back on like my struggles, the labels harmed more than helped, which is why I don't like labels. I have a bias against them. Uh, and yeah, right.
It's interesting because I don't see it as it harmed. I'm not sure
It
whether I see
did to
harm.
me.
Yeah, I think it was a starting point for me.
We'll talk about this in the next episode.
Cool.
See you next week.